This is the writing game, and I'm Gregory Palaci. So, you're writing a game, and you're not the creative director, lead writer, or in any way in charge. You're tasked with writing, and the only things you have to work with are the whims of your team. That's not an entirely horrible situation. Granted, I don't know what your team is like or how constraining you find the ideas they're coming up with, but I do have a solution for you to get all this to work and hopefully for you to write better. That's why we're looking to improv for how we can improve our game writing. After all, improv is part of improve. Improv relies just as much on listening as it does on delivering dialogue. That's hard for some people. Some people just concentrate on what they're going to say next, and they're not listening. You have to listen in order to see where the other person is going. JB Smoove. Take a look online and you'll find plenty of improv classes or lessons. They can be great, fun, improve your ability to communicate with others or perform. Of course, they're also useful for helping you understand and empathize with others, or just to do better at teamwork. But applying some of those lessons to writing requires a bit of thought, mainly because improv is about immediacy. You, as an actor, choose your actions based on what is happening in front of you, though it's not without consideration for what came before or what comes after. Writing, on the other hand, is about planning, even if you're doing it by the seat of your pants, or at least it is when it comes to video games. It sucks that it's rare that as writers we're allowed to freely explore and see where characters take us. But with other people relying on us for scripts, it's understandable that things are a little more contrived. And speaking of contrived, how about some contrivances of our own? We're going to cover 4 lessons from improv. The first, wimping and pimping. Those two are very closely related and not just because they rhyme. Rather, in improv, they're about relying on others to do the creative work and think up new ideas. Before we go further, these techniques apply to both writing and working with others, the latter being vital to larger teams where you aren't the only writer. And even if you are the only one, you'll inevitably be taking into account the ideas and story pitched by others on the team. You may even be doing narrative triage, in which case you really don't get to pitch ideas, but have to work with what you're given. The entire idea of wimping and pimping stems from the idea of being an active participant. In stories, a character is an active participant when they generate ideas and make decisions. Basically, they don't rely on others to do everything for them. Think Princess Leia, moving from a captive and reactive character in A New Hope to an active one when she grabs Luke's blaster rifle and takes charge. This isn't to say you need to dominate any writing room you're in, but rather that you just don't react passively, that you don't just sit there. Or more precisely, if you are on the receiving end of an idea or a suggestion, you roll with it and don't just answer with something non-committal. Anytime someone answers a question in improv with a shrug or an "I don't know," they're wimping. Wimping, understandably, isn't a great way to endear yourself to your team. You aren't giving them anything to work with if all you ever offer is nothing. Pimping, perhaps unintuitively, is not the exact opposite of wimping. Rather, it's doing much the same thing as you're not providing anything new to a scene. All you're doing is asking questions and getting others to come up with the ideas. Granted, you are allowed to ask questions, so it isn't something you should wholly avoid, only do so in moderation. Basically, As a writer, or really anytime you're an employee, you'll do better and be more appreciated if you're generating ideas and solutions. And that's not to say there won't be times or bosses who don't like that approach. I certainly have had them. But generally, it's better if you're active. The same holds true for characters. We like those who do something about their situation. In horror stories, we cheer for those who try and escape. We like superheroes because they aren't standing by while villainy takes over. So the same should hold true when it comes to being a writer. The second lesson of improv: never say no. Or rather, say yes, but, or and then. This follows on well from wimping and pimping because, like those, this is about working with others and their ideas. No one likes their idea to be shot down immediately without any consideration. I certainly doubt you do. So, a simple thing to do and a way of letting the best idea float to the top is to never say no. Instead, answer with yes, but, and then. Imagine you're tossing ideas around for a new game, and someone says, "What if there's a grappling hook?" Bit of editorial. They're awesome, by the way. I love Titanfall 2s, and Spider-Man's webs are really no different. But let's say you're actually a bad and boring person who doesn't like grappling hooks. Why are you working in video games? Answer that in your own time. So, if you're that person, your immediate inclination is to say no. But what if you didn't? What if instead you rolled with the idea of a grappling hook and then you wanted to add to that idea? Well, then you'd say something like, "There's a grappling hook, but it damages everything it grabs onto." Doing that small thing means you're creating an interesting situation that could be either comedic or dramatic. But in the case of a game, also makes for some interesting systemic interactions. An alternative to the yes but is the aforementioned and then. Going with the example of the grappling hook, you could say you get a grappling hook and then you have to swing from airship to airship. That immediately opens up a whole world of possibilities. What those are, I'll leave to you. Just know, if you write that story or you make that game, I want my cut. Staying positive and playing off of or building ideas is fun. It creates a positive atmosphere when working with others, and it can generate some really outrageous ideas that you wouldn't necessarily have to come to otherwise. And whether you're doing that for comedic gold or to tell interesting stories, it's still a great technique. That's not to say there isn't value in debating ideas and not necessarily looking for flaws, but as the Freakonomics podcast called it, being a troublemaker. Now, I'll point you to the episode in the show notes, but don't just make trouble for trouble's sake. For proof of the viability of the yes, but, and then technique, look no further than Matt Stone and Trey Parker, the creators of South Park. It's a technique they use to generate their episodes. And while the humor can be hit or miss, or simply not to your liking, they have inevitably written a lot.
We've found out this really simple rule that maybe you guys have all heard before, but it took us a long time to learn it. But we can take these beats, which are basically the beats of your outline, and if the words "and then" belong between those beats, you're f***ed, basically. You got something pretty boring. What should happen between every beat that you've written down is either the word "therefore" or "but." Right? So what I'm saying is that you come up with an idea and it's like, okay, this happens, right? And then this happens. No. It should be this happens and therefore this happens. But this happens, therefore this happens. And that, as soon as we are able to, and literally sometimes we'll write it out to make sure we're doing it. We'll have our beats and we'll say, okay, this happened, but then this happens, and that affects this, and that does to that, and that's why you get a show that feels like, okay, this to that, to this to that, but this, here's the complication, to that. And there's so many scripts we read from new writers and things that we see.
God, I see movies.
And
You see movies that you're just watching. It's like this happened, and then this happens, and then this happens. That's when you're in a movie, just going, "What the am I watching this movie for?" Just like this happened, and then this happened, and this happened. That's not a movie, you know. That's not a story. Like Trey said, it's those two, but because therefore, that gives you the causation between each beat, and that's a story.
Yeah.
If you do want to try your hands at this technique, but don't want to take an improv class, then have I got the thing for you. It's a tabletop role-playing system designed by yours truly. It's a simple system built on the entire premise of rolling with whatever happens. All you need are two dice, some friends not included, and your imagination to play. You'll find a link to where you can purchase the system in the show notes. Alright, self-promotion aside, tabletop role-playing games or pen and paper role-playing games, whatever you prefer to call them, are perfect places to try out these techniques, mainly because you're doing cooperative storytelling and you never know what others will do. Everything you do at the table is a lesson in improv. If you don't have friends or the time or the space to play those games, the emergence of actual play podcasts and series on YouTube is the perfect way to get a better understanding of these techniques. That's why I recommend listening to Campaign Podcast, the One Shot Podcast, Neoscum, Autonomic, or the shows from Saving Throw. Links for all of them are in the show notes. Lots of people also recommend Critical Role or Geek and Sundry, though I've never watched either. You should also check out Friends at the Table because while they're not comedians and improv actors, they do have some fantastic storytelling chops. But in listening or watching those shows, you'll get a better idea of what and how those techniques can be worked to keep a story going, or at the very least, keep people on track with generating ideas. The third lesson of improv is the importance of progressive complications. This ties in directly with the idea of saying yes, but, because that but is there to add a complication. If every addition to a story solved the problems already presented, then there's no drama. And if there's no drama, then there's no comedy either. Progressive complications move stories forward, never backward. They do so by making life more and more difficult, in positive as well as negative ways, for your lead character. In other words, you cannot have your protagonist stare down the same dilemma in Act 3 or Act 2 that the character has already faced in Act 1. You must progressively move from one dilemma to a more trying dilemma, to a bigger problem, to an even bigger problem, etc. Sean Coyne, The Story Grid, the book I constantly recommend. The best improv actors understand this, and utilize it, not to throw their compatriots under the proverbial bus, but because it makes for good storytelling. Their choices help resolve the previous problems presented in the scene, but in providing new ones, ensure the story doesn't come to a swift end. Not that they exclude untimely deaths and demises. Those are entirely possible to work with. Just look at an example of Whose Line Is It Anyways, and how they're able to introduce new characters and new problems to a scene. Or not, in this case.
Hello, Benjamin. I'm so glad you came over. I'm having trouble with my cable.
I believe you're trying to seduce me, Mrs. Robinson.
Mom, can I borrow the... What's going on here? Oh,
I can't can't believe, Mom, that you're here with my boyfriend. Oh. Huh? Now let's all act like adults. Act like adults, you're stealing my boyfriend. There's enough of me for everybody. Benjamin, it's time for you to make a choice. Yes, a choice. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. Whoever gives me the deepest, longest kiss, that will determine who I will stay with.
You get the point, hopefully. If not, I assume you've had a good laugh. The prime example, though, of progressive complications I like to use is from The Empire Strikes Back. Those on the Millennium Falcon are having to escape the Galactic Empire, but the first complication comes from their hyperdrive not working. So they have to keep fleeing the capital ships, which then launch TIE fighters to chase them. They then encounter the asteroid field, the third progressive complication, but are eventually able to hide after losing the TIE fighters. So the fourth complication is the Minox, aka space parasites, sucking the energy from the ship while they are hiding in the asteroid field. If they don't have power, then they can't fly away. So Han shoots the Minox, but causes the fifth complication, which is waking the giant space slug that they are currently hiding in. Thus, they must escape, only to end up right back in front of the Empire. And the final complication comes from Boba Fett's presence. But that only pays off later. If you want a game example, look to Halo. In it, the Master Chief has to defeat the Covenant, but in order to do so, he releases the Flood, which is a parasitic space zombie. So now Master Chief must fight and defeat both. Oh, and stop the superweapon they're all currently on from destroying the universe. It's just one problem after another, with each occurring as a result of the Chief's efforts to resolve the previous problem. It's fantastic. And yes, I know I got that a little wrong. It wasn't all the Chief's doing, but the humans lose their ship. They need to fight off the Covenant, and then need to survive the Flood, topped by stopping said superweapon from destroying the universe. So it really ups the progressive complications in a thrilling, holy shit sort of way. Which brings us to the fourth and final lesson. Listen and trust. No one sets out to make a bad game or tell a bad story. Well, not unless they're the producers. To get a game shipped is a team effort, and that requires trust. That trust is built over time and through a variety of means. But a big one that needs to be emphasized is listening. Listening means a lot when it comes to game writing and development. There's the team you need to listen to, the play testers, the game systems and mechanics. And then there's the story and the characters within. And juggling who gets priority is never going to be easy. Improv, of course, is great for learning to balance those demands because listening is an active skill. You can't just be focused on what you're doing or want to do, but have an idea of the bigger picture and how others fit into it. Of course, this may not be entirely possible on teams of 100 people or more, or maybe even over 10. Who knows? It depends on you. Getting a game shipped is like rowing a boat together. You all have to row in time together and in the same direction to get anywhere. Otherwise, you're just going in circles. Listening is what helps you coordinate while you're still leaving room for creativity. That, of course, is where my metaphor falls apart because there's no real room for creativity in rowing a boat. Maybe in the song you sing as you do. Singing does tend to be a large part of improv comedy. Of course, these lessons aren't just from improv comedy. They are just as true for other forms of improvisational theater. We just tend to experience improv comedy more than any other form. And all of it, whether it's trying to make us laugh or cry, is trying to tell a story. So, there's always something to be learned from it. For now, thanks for taking part in this episode of The Writing Game. I'm Gregory Palaci. Everything I do can be found at gregorypalaci.com, and I can be reached there or on Twitter at OneGameDad if you want to talk writing, games, this show, or even working together. And of course, be sure to check out my Patreon if you'd like to support me in what I do, which is at patreon.com/OneGameDad. The Writing Game is hosted by Third Culture Kids, which can be found at thirdculturekids.net. Please be sure to like and subscribe or rate and review this show on whatever platform you find it. I'll see you on the next episode.